Okay, hi. So for my presentation, I will be answering the question of what is the relationship between transnational policy and state law, and I will be using human trafficking as a sort of conduit to explain my answer. So for right now, this is what my presentation will be. It's tad unorthodox, but I'm using my Buddha heads and ceramics to explain how something as big as transnational law can connect to something as small as state law, just because as a people we tend to think that state law doesn't really have much of as an effect in terms of international and global policies and governmental issues. So here we have my biggest Buddha. And this Buddha will be representing transnational policy, and it is the biggest one just because transnational policy is a very arching and very big topic that can include a lot of smaller interconnected things. Next we have criminalization, just because criminalization happens all over the world, and whether it be something on a state scale or something on a national scale or even an international scale, criminalization is everywhere. Then on the smaller side, we have state economics and infrastructure, which I will be explaining how that can have a big impact a little later. And on the smallest side, we have state law, which, as I stated earlier, we tend to think as very small and very, lack of a better term, small potatoes when it comes to governmental issues and political policy. So here we go. So first I would like to explain human trafficking. Human trafficking is described as an organized crime practice that can empower states to deal with cross-border movements with, of course, humans that can be potentially threatening, and it can empower states not only to understand how I'm sorry, my fingers how those borders can affect human trafficking, but also how to better see how their networks can be potentially threatening in terms of exacerbating human trafficking or not stopping it at all. So nowadays, it is a very interdependent world, and I think that due to this, states have been weary to criminalize certain crimes or the same crimes as their neighbors to avoid policy expansion, especially with that associated with crime diversion. Crime diversion being if one state criminalizes literally anything because that is now criminalized and it is now illegal, that crime could be moved to another nearby state and making that crime more hyperactive, therefore diverting the crimes geographically. So within states, states are constantly competing for capital and other economic and political business, which inherently creates markets, and these markets can either be for goods and services or for things they want to exclude. And by interrupting that system, those same markets can create policy expansion among states that are more or less interdependent. So let's focus on state law. When one state criminalizes human trafficking, its neighbors can anticipate that trafficking and will be and anticipate how that sort of trafficking can be diverted to their own jurisdictions. As I stated earlier, crime diversion. Criminalization policies are essentially contagious, for lack of a better word, since the potential exists for the enforcement in one country to divert transnational criminal activity elsewhere, and this is where state law begins to have a big impact in terms of transnational policy, because crime always starts somewhere, and no matter if it is illegal in that area, it will always be moved elsewhere, as I said, just because the for example, this is all based off human trafficking, just because human trafficking is such a global crime, organized crime, that just because it's illegal in one place does not mean that it won't move to another place. So, criminalization diffuses strongly amongst neighboring states that are connected by dense trans-border highways. So, states being like Sweden or things of that nature, Eastern European states, they're all connected somehow, just because, again, there are like bordering states and neighboring states. Therefore, these sort of like systems of these trans-border systems, railroads, bus stations, things of that nature, it can make it easier for that crime to move transnationally. Yeah. And it's easy to say that certain systems that states have created to make economic intermingling between other states can also be seen as ways for negative policy expansion to neighboring states. One stressing and that goes along with state economics and infrastructure. So one stressing competitive policy, and other stressing normative processes are things like within the state infrastructure, which if they criminalize or to not criminalize any particular set of economic transaction or things of that nature, or even crimes of that nature, when other states do the opposite, it can render the unregulated market more business friendly or more non-business friendly. So really it's about state economics and trying to make it flow easier, so states might not criminalize a particular kind of economic transaction when other states do, because they want to be seen as more business friendly and further their state economic status. Therefore, transnational crime sees traffickers as a challenge to state authority, as well as the state's well-being, the citizens within that state. Moreover, connecting it to the broader problem of criminal networks that goes beyond national borders. Many more states are attracted to, and here we will go to criminalization, even though we have been discussing it this whole time. Many more states are attracted to problem framing in a way that empowers states than to sort of frame policies around the idea of legal implications and obligations. And this can be because, going back to state law, it allows for the government to have more control over people living in that state, as well as just a better overall government handle on its citizens, which can then lead to these state officials asking for transnational or international resources that will strengthen its own state and its law enforcement institutions. So, in this you can see how transnational policy connects to state law and vice versa, because it always has to start somewhere. So state law and what they criminalize or do not criminalize, what they create policies for and what they don't, and how that can affect transnational policy. And the transnational policy regarding human trafficking, of course, it's being a human rights violation, and it starts with state laws and essentially how they handle this issue and dictate what they're going to do about it that affects their state, the neighboring states, and of course that leads to transnational policy in a way to unify how they criminalize or do not criminalize things, as well as state economics and infrastructure tying in, of course, to state law, which also ties into transnational policy. That's essentially my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.